I like to write a lot of things, so what would happen if I wrote Game of Thrones Season 8? What would I keep? What would I change? And most importantly, would people still hate it? Let's find out. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hi everybody, I'm Vitamin Fantasia. Welcome to this Thumb Together video essay. Today I want to talk to you about Game of Thrones Season 8, alright? Because nobody else on the internet is talking about it right now. Breaking new ground. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. Now before we get started, I need to make a thing clear here. I did not hate Season 8 of Game of Thrones. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. And I do not hate Benioff and Weiss. In fact, I want to applaud David Benioff and D.B. Weiss for giving us 7 glorious seasons of one of the best written shows on television. Some people tend to forget they still wrote seasons 1 through 7, and they did a pretty freaking damn good job of it too. So thank you, Benioff and Weiss, for the amazing story you've given us. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I can't wait to see what you do with Star Wars. Now, having said that, now we got the boring caveats out of the way. Let's get to the fun part. What if I wrote Game of Thrones Season 8? What would I have done differently? As a guy who writes fantasy a lot, as a guy who writes science fiction a lot, this is kind of in my wheelhouse, so what would I have done? Well, if the pen was literally in my hand, if HBO was like, here you go, here's the final season, what are you going to do? Knowing what I know now, here's how I think it would go down. Our first 2 episodes, I think, would remain pretty much the same. It's about getting all the players to Winterfell so that the battle against the White Walkers can commence. The difference here is that there's the scene where Bronn is approached by Maester Qyburn, and Qyburn says, the Queen wants you to kill her brothers, and he gives him a crossbow. I would have done this a little differently, because Bronn, we want to give something tangible to him for this season, because he hasn't really done much looking back on Season 8. So instead of the order being kill the Queen's brothers, I'm going to change that. So now the order is this. Cersei Lannister is, we know, a very spiteful, vindictive human being. So when Jaime walked away from her at the end of Season 7, I feel like she's the kind of person who'd be like, no, I'm not having that. So her order is, I want you to bring my brother Jaime back to me so he can answer for what he's done. He walked away from me. Nobody walks away from me. I'm the queen. So with the promise of untold riches for his trouble, Bronn sets off following Jaime north to try to bring him back to Winterfell. So we get the first 2 episodes pretty much the same as how we had them before. The build-up, the fireside conversation, knighting Brienne, all that stuff is beautiful. Then we get to the big battle at Winterfell. We get to the long night. This is where stuff starts to skew differently for me. First and foremost, I'm sorry, I gotta say it, better lighting. I know that's not a story thing, but yeah, I'm making a note. Light this scene better. Thank you. But here's the next thing I would change. We have this fortification around Winterfell, okay? This pit that they have dug with these wooden spikes sticking out of it. Take your army and put it behind those wooden sticks. Okay, everybody has mentioned that already. Having the army out front was not a smart idea. We all know that. So yeah, put the wooden moat around Winterfell. However, a problem arises that the heroes have to overcome, and that problem is this. When the army of White Walkers comes, it blows a freezing blizzard throughout the land. So the whole fight is going to take place in this massive blizzard of snow and hail and all that fun stuff. So the initial plan was for the soldiers to light this trench up with these wooden stakes ablaze so that the zombies couldn't get past it. However, the blizzard is causing the matches to go out and the fire cannot last. The fire dies in this swirling torrent of freezing rain. They can't light the wood. They're vulnerable. So everybody turns to the one person in Winterfell who seems to have no problem conjuring fire, and that person is Beric Dondarrion. Beric Dondarrion has been brought to life after death by the Red Priest Thoros of Myr. So Beric has the power, we've seen him do it, to coat his sword with magic fire. Melisandre does not show up at all. She's done. She's gone. We don't see Melisandre again. The onus is on Beric. He has to light that with magic fire. But here's the thing. One person with magic fire is still not powerful enough to keep the storm at bay. They need 2. They don't have Melisandre. They don't have Thoros of Myr because he died last season. So who else could possibly do it? Well, how about the only other person at Winterfell who's actually been dead before? How about Jon Snow? Beric tells Jon, you're like me. You have seen the afterlife and come back. The Red Witch has used the magic of the Lord of Flame or Lord of Light or whatever the hell he's called and brought you back. So that magic is in you. You can do it too. He takes out Longclaw, puts it in Jon's hand, and he's like, light your sword on fire. And we get this kind of like Karate Kid moment, and it's tense because the zombies are coming. There's no time. It's crunch time. The zombies are coming. Daenerys is trying to hold them off with the dragon, but there's only so much she can do because now the Night King is coming with his dragon. So there's that tension going on. And they're clashing. And meanwhile, everybody on the ground is like, please, God, somebody light this fire around Winterfell or we're all screwed. And Jon is like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And Beric is like, yes, you freaking can. Try harder. And finally, after trying and, attempting with all of his might and putting his heart and soul into it, and the tension keeps building because Daenerys and her dragon are losing their fight against the Night King and his dragon, Jon finally summons up the power from within him, and whoosh, he gets Longclaw to be set ablaze, and together he and Beric Dondarrion use their magic fire swords. It sounds really silly when I say that out loud, doesn't it? But they use their magic fire swords to light the trenches around Winterfell, keeping the zombies out just as they're about to approach the trench. In the nick of time, they save the day. And that, my friends, not only takes care of that problem, it also takes care of a very, very big problem that I have, which is Jon's resurrection. I don't like when characters just come back from the dead willy-nilly because it takes away any tension that exists in the room at that point. That's why Star Trek II, The Cure for Death, did not impress anybody. So when Jon came back, the whole time I'm thinking, okay, there better be a good reason. This better come into play at somewhere down the line. And it never did. So that's one of the first big things I would change, because it takes care of logistical stuff in the fight, adds more tension, and it gives Jon an arc, or at least Jon's resurrection an arc that it didn't have before. Doesn't that sound nice? Doesn't that sound kind of neat? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. So the battle rages on like it did in the actual season. At one point, the dead zombies kind of do what they did before, where there's so many of them that are falling at the trench that their bodies pile up high enough that other zombies can kind of scurry over the pile, avoid the fire, and get into the castle. And that's how we get some of the more hand-to-hand fighting. That's how we get Dolorous Ed being killed. That's how we get Beric Dondarrion being killed. That's how we get Lyanna Mormont fighting the giant and sacrificing her life. All that really cool stuff that was part of that battle. Now, throughout the battle, even though we're focusing on all of our characters like Brienne and Jon and Daenerys and so forth, we keep cutting to a family, a husband and a wife, and their daughter. Their daughter's maybe 7 years old. We keep cutting to them and seeing their reactions. Maybe they're hiding in the crypts or something like that. I feel like that's where they'd be. But regardless, the camera keeps showing us what's happening to this family and how they're trying to survive the night. That's important. Take that, put it aside for later, okay? Okay. More fighting takes place. The Night King lands his dragon in Winterfell and goes for Bran. Jorah Mormont dies protecting his queen, just like before. All that's fine. Then we get to the next big change. The Night King approaches Bran, reaches out his hand, and touches Bran. And Bran, starts warging or whatever it is he does, and he's like going bananas. Jon shows up, Arya shows up, maybe even Sansa shows up. She ran into the crypts and she wants to come help. And it looks like they're about to start tag teaming the Night King and taking him down when Bran's like, stop! Everybody stop fighting right now. We've made a horrible mistake. All the Starks are naturally like, Bran, what the hell, dude? Like, this guy's a bad guy. He looks like Darth Maul. We gotta fight him. And Bran's like, no. We're not gonna fight him. The reason he's coming after us is because we broke a promise. And Bran goes into this explanation of exactly what the White Walkers are looking for. And because Bran has that warging power, he can actually show us instead of telling us. Showing is always more interesting than telling. So we don't have to have a scene where it's just Bran in a wheelchair saying blah, 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 blah. We get a narrated actual flashback told by Bran Stark. And according to this flashback, millennia ago, the people of the North made a pact with the White Walkers because the White Walkers needed to reproduce. They wanted to, continue their society like anybody would, except they can't reproduce because they're kind of halfway between life and death. So the pact was every year, the people of the North would give the White Walkers 50 of their sons and daughters. And the White Walkers would do what they did way back in the day, where they would take those living babies and instead of killing them, just touch them with their magic, and the babies would become, blue-eyed White Walkers who are not mindless zombies, but something much more human and articulated. The reason the White Walkers suddenly started attacking everybody these past few seasons is because that pact was broken once Jon Snow and all the Night's Watch killed Craster. That's right, Craster, the guy who had like 50 wives who were also his daughters and whatnot, where Sam rescued Gilly. That guy was sacrificing his babies to the White Walkers. He was the last one upholding the bargain. As soon as he was killed, as soon as all those women were freed, the bargain was broken and the White Walkers were like, yo, where's our babies? They came down to get some shit done and make sure that the North remembers their pact, because that's kind of the thing about the North is they remember. That's what all their business cards say. So Bran finishes explaining this to everybody. He lays it down. He's like, we have to stop fighting. They're going to kill us all. We need to honor the pact and give them our children. The Starks are not really sure what to make of this. Maybe I feel like Jon would be like, no, I'm not giving our children to these monsters, whatever. And Sansa's like, yeah, man, he's a monster. He's ugly. He's got horns. I don't want to cooperate with this douche. Maybe other, cooler heads, maybe people like Tyrion, people like Arya are like, you know what? If sacrificing a few babies, they're not being hurt, they're just changing their physique, whatever. If that will keep us from war, maybe it's a good thing. And there's like this little back and forth where some of the characters disagree, some of them don't. There's tension between them. So both of these sides are arguing and nobody is really giving any ground when all of a sudden somebody steps out into, through the crowd, somebody steps out into the open and we see it's the little girl from that family that we've been following. And that little girl's parents, we've seen throughout the fight, have been killed. During the night, the zombies have been attacking. The mom and dad have both fallen in battle, and now it's just a little girl, and she's all by herself. She has nobody left in the world. And she approaches the group of arguing Starks and the White Walkers, and she says, I'll go with them. I have nothing left here. And, people will be like, oh, what are you doing? No, don't go with them. And maybe Jon will try to hold her back or something. But this girl's like, no. Like, I have nothing left. My parents are dead. My home is gone. It's burned. What are you going to do? You going to take me in? You're going to adopt me? No. I'm going to go with them. It's going to save everybody. And this little girl goes and she takes one of the White Walkers' hands, whatever. And the White Walkers are like, okay, keep this up and we'll have peace. They are satisfied for now. So they turn around and they leave. And the battle at Winterfell comes to an end. There's losses on both sides. But now there's this air of oh, that's what they wanted. Are we the idiots for messing up and forgetting that oath? How many lives were lost because we didn't pay attention to the past? So we get that whole party scene with the Starbucks cup and everybody at Winterfell is having a good time, but it's much more subdued now because a lot of people realize, it's not oh, we killed the monsters. It's oh, were we the monsters? I mean, we kind of broke some vows, man. That's not cool. So the party is it's tense. Maybe you got half of the room who's yeah, we killed the monsters and we'll freaking do it again. And the other half of the room is I feel dirty. I feel bad that this is happening. I don't know what to think. And there's much more tension in the air. You can almost cut it with a knife, and you can see the distinctions between the two parties. No pun intended. We still get that great moment of Brienne and Jaime kind of having their little one-night stand because they're drunk, whatever. I like that moment. I like that connection between them. And we still get the Starbucks cup because why not? Now, another big change. The next morning, Jaime Lannister goes out. He takes a walk. He's by himself. He's just looking at Winterfell. And it's just after dawn. There's still sort of that twilight gloom over Winterfell. Nobody's around. It's just Jaime. He's out walking the battlements. Everything is quiet and still, perfectly juxtaposing what happened the night before with all the chaos and darkness. And he's just walking. He's looking at the mess around him and taking in what had happened the night before. And it's this peaceful moment, and he's just kind of standing there, and he's staring out over the wilderness of the north, and he's thinking, I was just with Brienne of Tarth. That was kind of nice. Maybe there's a life for me here. Maybe there's a life for me away from my sister and away from the bullshit and the politics of King's Landing. Maybe, just maybe, I might be able to be happy here. And then whoosh, a bag goes over his head. He's knocked out. Bronn has arrived at Winterfell. Bronn subdues Jaime, takes him away. He's like, sorry about this, but I'd like to get paid. And he drags Jaime back to King's Landing. Now, once the rest of Winterfell wakes up, nobody knows where Jaime is. Brienne is definitely missing him. She's like, anybody see that knight that I slept with? Anybody? The guy, he's got a gold hand. It's kind of hard to miss him. Anybody know where he went? Anyone at all? Brienne of Tarth has a feeling. She's got a gut feeling that Jaime went back to King's Landing. She thinks he went willingly to go back to his sister. She thinks he did what he actually does on the show. And Brienne is hurt and she's upset, but she decides she's going to go and talk to him and bring him back. Talk some sense into this guy, get him back to Winterfell, where she feels he belongs. She apologizes to Sansa and says, I have to go down and do this. And Sansa, who has been kind of cold throughout the season and, hasn't really been much of a team player, Sansa finally completes her arc. She becomes a team player by saying, Brienne, pack a second horse because I'm going with you. I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go help my family. Sansa and Brienne and Podrick, why not? Let's get Podrick in there. They all head down to King's Landing as well. Arya still goes down with the Hound. They take the King's Road on their own. So now all parties are converging back to the south, and we get that moment where everybody is coming up on Dragonstone. Now in the show, Euron Greyjoy suddenly fires. He comes out of nowhere and he fires and he kills Daenerys' other dragon, whose name I can't recall. Now, is that Rhaegal or Viserion? I can't remember. I'm never clear on those two dragons' names, but it's the green dragon. Euron kills the green dragon on the show. But this time he doesn't. Instead, he fires at the dragons, and he clips the green dragon's wing, and the green dragon's like, ah, shit, my wing! Except not in English, in dragon roar. And everybody's alerted to the fact that the ships are there, and Daenerys is freaking out, and she sees that there's like scorpions all on every one of the boats. And so she's like, my main priority is I gotta get my dragons out of the way of those scorpions. I can't help. I'm sorry. But Euron's fleet fires on her fleet, and we get that little naval battle, that very one-sided naval battle with the scorpions, and they take down Daenerys' ships. Missandei still gets kidnapped by the pirates, and everybody has to wash ashore and kind of get their bearings. Then we get that scene at the end of episode 4 where everybody goes to the wall of King's Landing, and Cersei's up on that platform with the Mountain and Missandei, and there's peace talks that are trying to be made, but the two queens are too stubborn and they won't budge, so Cersei tells the Mountain, okay, kill her, and Missandei has her moment where she looks at Daenerys and she's like, Dracarys, and the Mountain kills her. Daenerys is pissed. Grey Worm is especially pissed because that was his lady, and war is about to arrive. So then we get to the bells. Here we go. Here's where the real Game of Thrones haters are like, okay, Fantasia, bring it, mofo. The whole Battle of King's Landing and the finale are one giant episode, okay? So everything that would have started in the episode The Bells, from that point forward, is the finale. So keep that in mind as well. The big difference is this time Daenerys has 2 dragons. So with the 2 dragons, it makes a bit more sense that she was able to sort of come around and take out the scorpions so quickly. Now, during one of those conversations that would have taken place before the Battle of King's Landing, Tyrion and Brienne would have gotten together, and Brienne would have told him, like, look, I think your brother went back to the queen. I think he went back to Cersei, blah, blah. And Tyrion's like, oh, God, I hope not. So they've had this in their minds together. They're sharing this understanding. Nobody else really knows about it. Nobody else frankly really cares about Jaime at this point except those two. So while the King's Landing battle is happening and the troops are on the ground fighting, Tyrion and Brienne kind of share this moment where they look at each other and they're like, let's go. And during all that commotion, they get to the Red Keep in the same way that Jaime got in the actual season. You know, they push through the crowd, they slip through the cracks of the door, and they get to the Red Keep. Now, while they're sneaking around there, they're still like on the ground floor. Cersei's way up. They're nowhere near her, but they encounter Bronn. And Bronn is like, oh, Tyrion, what the fuck are you doing here? And Tyrion's like, I could ask you the same thing. Like, where's my brother? And Bronn, he's up front. He's like, look, your sister paid me a lot of money to take him, and right now he's locked up in the dungeon until the battle's over. And Tyrion and Brienne are like, no, we're getting him out. So they go down and they free Jaime from the dungeon. That's where Tyrion has that beautiful talk that he had with Jaime in the actual show. And Brienne is like, okay, you're free. You can come back to us now. But now Jaime has that moment that he had in the show. He's back in King's Landing and he's like, look, I love you both, but I still love my sister. And I need to get her out of here. I need to get her to safety. So, you know, Brienne is arguing it. She's like, no, forget her, come with us. But Tyrion talks some reason into the group and he's like, fine. He goes, Jaime, he tells him about the tunnel. He's like, take Cersei down there, take her out to the shore, and then just take a boat to Essos somewhere. They have that same conversation and it's beautiful and they hug it out. And he has like a little farewell to Brienne as well. Brienne and Jaime hug it out and then they go their separate ways. So Jaime goes up through the Red Keep to try to find Cersei, and their stuff kind of ends just like it did on the show. Tyrion and Brienne emerge back out into the streets of King's Landing. The battle is starting to wind down now. And finally, we hear that the bells start to ring and King's Landing's forces have surrendered. Everything looks like it's going fine. Then we cut to Euron Greyjoy. At the very beginning of the battle, Euron Greyjoy's ships were destroyed when the dragons were, tearing shit up with their fire. But Euron has crawled his way to shore and he gets into the city, and there's one scorpion that's still in working condition. And he's all pissed off. He doesn't care about the bells, whatever, because he's just an asshole. And he grabs the scorpion and he shoots, and now he kills the green dragon. He wipes the green dragon out of the sky. We get that really crazy moment. It can still catch us off guard like it did when it happened on the show. Euron Greyjoy is like, hey, yeah, I did it. I took out one of the dragons. Now, the soldiers of King's Landing, the soldiers who work for Cersei, they see this happen and they're terrified. They're staring down Daenerys' army and they throw down their weapons. They're like, look, man, that guy, he has nothing to do with us. We surrendered. Please, for the love of God, don't hurt us. And everybody's just kind of frozen and they're like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? We lost the dragon, and all eyes turn to Daenerys Targaryen. And she's sitting on Drogon on a wall and she watches her green dragon fall and die. And she has that moment where she's staring and she's just covered in blood and sweat and ash, and she's furious and she's thinking about all these horrible things that have just kept happening, and how she lost her husband and her unborn child and her friends and Jorah Mormont And now her 2 dragons, and she's got 1 left, and it's all freaking Cersei Lannister's fault, and she hates that woman so much, and she's like, you know what? I've had enough of this shit. She ignores the bells, and she starts her fiery rampage, tearing through King's Landing with Drogon, setting everything ablaze. We get this great moment where Euron Greyjoy, he's still holding the scorpion. He's like, I'm going to take down her last dragon too. And that freaking dragon just comes out of nowhere. And instead of burning fire down on him, the dragon skims over the wall and bites off the top of Euron Greyjoy's body. And he's just like a pair of legs, and he just flops over. Because that guy needed a really, really satisfying death, and I don't think we got it. We get that beautiful encounter between Sandor Clegane and his brother Gregor, the Hound and the Mountain, finally take one another out. Qyburn dies. Jaime finds his sister, and they go into the tunnels, but the tunnels collapse on them. There's chaos in the streets. Arya's running through the streets. Tyrion's running through the streets. Brienne's running through the streets. And we get that moment with Grey Worm, when Grey Worm is standing there facing down the Red Keep's soldiers, and he locks eyes with Jon. And John's like, don't do it, buddy. Don't do it. And Grey Worm is like, ah! And he's so mad, and he's lost it too. And he starts cutting through all of the surrendered men. And Jon, at first, he runs up and he tries to stop him. Instead of joining the fray, he's like, what are you doing? And he puts his hands on Grey Worm, and Grey Worm pushes him back, and it looks like they're gonna fight. And there's just this massive moment, unblinking, heated rage between the two of them. And then Grey Worm just turns and he continues what he's doing. He continues wiping through Cersei's soldiers, who are all unarmed men at this point. And Jon is like, Jesus Christ, what's happening? And the Northmen start following suit. They start following the Unsullied and the Dothraki, and they're just acting like complete lunatics and killing everybody they can see. Nobody's safe. Women, children, unarmed villagers, they're all falling to the blades of these people. And Jon Snow is standing there in the midst of it. He's like, what are we doing? What's happening? And the rest of the battle continues much like it did on the show. Then we get that moment where the dust has settled, and all the Dothraki and Unsullied are sort of lined up in that Colosseum area of King's Landing, and Daenerys finally lands with Drogon, and she goes out to address all of these soldiers, and she's like, we have liberated King's Landing, and we'll liberate anybody else who stands in our way. And they're all, crazy, and they're doing their things with their swords, where they're like, ah, yay, more blood, that's what we want. It's clearly not good. What's happening is not good. We see Arya, who's watching with just this look of hatred on her face. Like, she's looking at Daenerys like, this freaking woman has twisted everything she said she's standing for. Like, you could tell Arya's just ready to kill. Arya's so upset. Sansa is looking at Daenerys with just this air of I knew it. I knew Jon was wrong to trust this lady. I just knew it. There was something off about her. Brienne looks absolutely stunned. She can't believe what she's seeing. Davos Seaworth, he feels like he just wants to crawl in a hole and die. Tyrion is furious. He has had enough. And Jon has this look on his face where he's just so lost and confused. He's trying to tell himself this. He's struggling with this back and forth, and he knows that what Daenerys did was wrong, but he's trying to defend her because A, he loves her, and B, he saw that dragon get killed after the bells rang. So Daenerys finishes giving her speech, and just like we saw in the show, Tyrion approaches her, and he pulls off his hand to the queen badge, and he's like, there, I'm through. Get yourself a new hand, because I'm not doing this for you anymore. And Daenerys tells her guards, she's like, take him away, he betrayed me. So they lock him up. And then Daenerys turns to Jon, and she kind of holds his face, and she's like, Jon, we did it, we won, and together we're going to rule this world, and we're going to rule it the right way. And Jon is still, he's so torn. He just saw Tyrion be taken away, but he's staring into Daenerys' eyes, and he loves her so much, and he's just like, I don't know what to do here. And she says, don't worry about that, let me figure out what to do. Just tell me you'll stand by my side, tell me you're still with me. And poor Jon is just like, okay, of course I'm with you. Of course I'm still with you. And she grabs Jon and she kisses him in front of that giant group of people, and everybody is still like, woo, yeah, the queen's gonna get laid tonight. Arya's watching this. She watches Jon and Daenerys kiss. Just by the look on her face, she doesn't say anything, but you can tell she's thinking, my brother's a lost cause. He was supposed to be the level-headed one. I was gonna go to him and be like, we need to take care of some business here, but clearly he can't help anybody anymore. So just with this look of disgust on her face, Arya turns around and walks away. She disappears into the mist. So we cut to later, maybe like a day later, and Jon is alone, and he's wandering the streets of King's Landing, and he wants to go talk to Tyrion and just, get some advice, because Tyrion is known to be the guy to give you some sage advice. So on his way to talk to Tyrion, he has that encounter, much like he did in the show, where he sees Grey Worm, and Grey Worm is just killing unarmed men. He's spilling their blood. And again, they have this moment where the two of them lock eyes, and Jon is like, what are you doing? Stop. They're not fighting anymore. The war's over. And Grey Worm is like, I'll say when the war's over. And once again, they get in each other's faces. And you think, oh shit, they're going to throw down. And then he just backs away. Grey Worm goes back to cutting people's throats. Jon walks into the prison cell, and he has his heart-to-heart with Tyrion. And just like in the actual season, Tyrion kind of gets Jon to spill the truth. He's like, you know as much as I do, Jon. What she did was very wrong. And you know that once a person starts down that path, that's it. Now, Jon is still very torn and he doesn't like this one bit, but he has to admit Tyrion is right. So we get this very heavy moment where Jon is on his own and he's contemplating and he thinks, I need to do this. I need to take out Daenerys Targaryen. And his first thought is like, if I'm going to get to her, first things first, I got to take care of Grey Worm. So we see Jon kind of skulking through the ruins of the Red Keep, and he's hiding at the end of the passageway, and we see a door open to like a bed chamber or something. And out of that bed chamber walks Grey Worm, and he's, adjusting his clothing, and he's heading towards the throne room thing, and Jon is like, well, it's now or never. So Jon sneaks down the hall. Grey Worm goes like this, like he can sense somebody's behind him, and he turns around, and just as he turns around, Jon approaches, comes up behind Grey Worm, buries a knife in Grey Worm's stomach, and Grey Worm looks down at the wound, and he looks back up at Jon, and Jon is like, Jon has this like bloodlust on his face, because Jon is actually, as much as he hates to admit it, he enjoys doing this because he is not a fan of Grey Worm right now. And then we get sucker punched, because we see Grey Worm go like this and pull off a mask and see Arya Stark underneath that Grey Worm mask, and Jon has just stabbed his sister. Arya is coughing up blood, and she crumbles. Jon cannot believe what he's just seen. Arya's lying dead in his hands. He's freaking out. Footsteps come around the corner. It's more of the Unsullied guards. They see Jon standing over Arya's body with blood everywhere, and they seize him. He doesn't even fight back. He's so stunned. They seize him, and they lock his arms behind his back, and they take his sword, and they escort him to the throne room, and Daenerys is in the throne room. The guards tell her what happened. They're holding Arya's body as well, and she sees that Arya is dressed like Grey Worm. Daenerys puts two and two together, and then she tells the guards, leave us, and the guards leave the room. So it's just Jon and Daenerys in the throne room. Then Daenerys calls Drogon, and Drogon flies up through the hole in the wall, and he lands in the throne room, and Jon's looking up at Drogon, and he's like, this is it. I'm gonna die. And Daenerys looks at Jon, and she's got this sort of unreadable expression on her face. You can't tell if she's angry or what. She looks like she might just be disappointed, and she turns to Drogon, and she says, Dracarys. And Drogon opens his mouth and spews a torrent of fire onto Jon Snow. It goes on and on until finally Daenerys yells for him to stop. Drogon shuts his mouth. The smoke clears, and Jon is still alive, completely naked, curled up on the ground of the throne room. Daenerys stands over him and looks down at him, and she says, you have been touched by fire, and you haven't burned, because you are Aegon Targaryen. You are fire and blood incarnate. You are not Jon Snow. That girl was not your sister. They are nobody. We are all that matters. We have never seen Jon in this state of mind. He's already unbelievably shocked at what he has done to Arya, but now he's had this fire engulf him and he hasn't died. Jon cannot process what is happening, and he's curled up and he's shaking and he's sweating and he's weeping uncontrollably, and he's just trying to speak, but he can't even get words out. And Daenerys shushes him and she grabs his hand and she says, who are you? And he can't speak, and he's still blubbering and frothing at the mouth, and she slaps him and she says, who are you? And he says, I'm Jon Snow. I'm Jon Snow. And she hits him again, and she says, who are you? And finally, utterly defeated, Jon looks her in the eye, and through trembling lips he manages to say, I'm Aegon Targaryen. And Daenerys nods her head slowly, and then she asks, and who am I? And Jon can barely get the words out, and he just whispers, you're my queen. And Daenerys has this look on her face that pretty much says, you're goddamn right, I'm your queen. And she reaches out and he takes her hand, and then the screen cuts to black. But it's not over yet, because the show ends with an epilogue. We start off with a man we have never seen before. He's a total stranger to us. Let's call him Charlie. And we see him running through the front gates of the city of King's Landing. And Charlie looks very upset, and he's out of breath, and he's panting, and he's got wounds all over his face, blood, he's bruised, his clothes are dirty. It's nighttime, and there's a thunderstorm, and King's Landing is being pelted by lightning and thunder, and it's very dramatic and dark and creepy, and it looks kind of like Mordor. We're like, what's going on? And Charlie keeps running and running and running, and he starts to approach the Red Keep. Then we cut away. We cut away to somewhere much farther north, deep in the forest. There's a ruined temple. Let's say, like, a thousand-year-old temple that used to belong to, like, the children of the forest or whatnot, and it's just sitting there in the middle of the woods, and we see a group of soldiers. Clearly they're Northmen, and these Northmen are carrying a figure in between them. It's a man, and he's got a bag over his head so we can't see his face, and they're carrying this figure. He's clearly their prisoner, and they bring him to the center of this temple where it's almost amphitheater-like. Cut back to King's Landing. Charlie is continuing to run through the streets, and now he's at the gates of the Red Keep, and he's pounding on them, and there's guards on either side of the door, and they look at him and they're like, what do you want? What are you doing? And he's like, I have to talk to the queen right away. Cut back to the ruined temple in the woods. The two Northmen take this prisoner and they throw him to the ground and they pull him upright so he's sitting up on his knees, and somebody calls for his bag to be removed and they pull the bag off his head. It's Charlie. Cut back to King's Landing. Thunder and lightning are still going off. The camera pans up, and as the camera keeps panning up, we get to the night sky and there's a brief flash of lightning. And in that flash, we're not sure because it happens so fast, but we see what looks like 3 dragons in the skies above the keep. Before we get an answer, cut back to the ruins in the forest. The camera is on Charlie's face and he's being spoken to by a woman's voice. And the woman is saying, "Don't bother yelling for help. Your friends are dead. It's just you out here now." Cut back to King's Landing. Charlie is escorted into the throne room and there's all these people lined up in neat rows. Most of them are Unsullied or Dothraki soldiers. And as Charlie's brought closer to the throne, we see a man standing right at the foot of the steps. He's looking down. He looks weak and subdued and defeated. And as Charlie is brought to the throne, the man looks up and we see that this man is Jon Snow, but he's much older than the last time we've seen him. We have jumped forward roughly 25 years. Jon Snow is now a middle-aged man. He just looks utterly spent, like he has no life, no vitality left in his body. And seated in the throne, a much bigger, more fierce-looking throne, is Daenerys Targaryen. She too is middle-aged now, but unlike Jon, she looks powerful and fierce. And Daenerys says, "What happened?" We cut back to the temple in the woods, and the camera slowly pans around in a circle, and we see a woman who has been talking to Charlie. It's Sansa Stark. She too is a middle-aged woman now. She's a little bit older than Catelyn was before Catelyn got killed. And Sansa Stark has a group of Northmen behind her. We see wildlings in all their fur and their bearded glory, and they're standing behind Sansa too. She's got her own big posse of people. And Sansa tells Charlie, "You're not going to die tonight, Charlie. We kept you alive because we want you to go send a message to the Dark Queen Daenerys Targaryen." We cut back to King's Landing now, and we see there are in fact dragons swirling above this fortress. The people of the city do not look like they are the happiest people. It is a town built on a foundation of oppression. Charlie is kneeling at the throne, and he looks up at Daenerys and he says, "I found them, my queen. I found them. They've been building an army." And Daenerys does not look happy. And slowly, she grips the edges of her chair and she leans forward. And Daenerys is like, "What did they say?" And Charlie is terrified. You know, he doesn't want to be the bearer of bad news, but he has bad news and he's got to bear it. And Daenerys is getting angrier and angrier with every second when she's like, "What did they say?" Cut back one last time to the ruins in the forest. Sansa and her whole team are standing facing down Charlie. As the camera slowly pans out, we see more and more of this team she's assembled, and it is in fact an army of Northmen, an army of wildlings, and we see an army of White Walkers. The North has been keeping their oath. The White Walkers are now their allies. And at the very back, perched up high on a crumbled wall, is the Night King himself on top of the zombie dragon. And Charlie is horrified, and Sansa's looking down at him, and she says, "You are going to go back to King's Landing, and you are going to let everybody know what you saw here today. We have not forgotten what Daenerys Targaryen did all those years ago to my brother, to my sister, to the people of King's Landing, and we never will forget, because we are the North, and the North remembers. So go back and tell your so-called queen, winter is coming." Cut to black, cut to end credits. That's the end of Game of Thrones. At least that's what I would do. If the pen was in my hands, those are the steps I think I would take. As far as I'm concerned, it makes the ending way more interesting because we clearly know more is about to happen, but just how will it go down? Maybe we'll never find out. But that would be a story for another day entirely. Anyway, I'm Andrew Fantasia. I hope you enjoyed that what-if scenario of if I had written Game of Thrones Season 8. If you really liked that, well then maybe consider checking out Side Scroller, because unlike Game of Thrones Season 8, this is something I actually did write. There's my name right up there. Side Scroller is an adventure fantasy set in a world that runs on the logic of video games, and you can purchase it for your very own on Amazon.com, and it's available in paperback or ebook format. Get it now while supplies last. Supplies will always last. Anyway, thanks for hearing me ramble for God knows how many minutes that was. I'll see you all next time, and until then, adios.